All right. Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of the Roscoe's Wetsuit Podcast. On the show today, we have Norman Plotkin. Norman is an author, hypnotherapist, coach, writer, along with public speaker. He's had a 25-year career as a public policy consultant and lobbyist. He battled cancer and then emerged with a new perspective. Afterwards, he went back to school and became a certified clinical hypnotherapist, wrote a book on taking charge of your health challenges, and began to advocate for people instead of companies. Currently, Norman is tending to his private hypnotherapy practice and leading virtual group meditation sessions. He's about to release his second book, Master Mind, Master Life. Norman, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be here, Toby.
Awesome. Well, I want to kind of get maybe if we could kind of sort of get your story as far as you, your vocal on your website, about kind of your battle with cancer. So tell me a little about kind of, finding hypnosis and then kind of deciding to dedicate a career change to the practice of it.
Yeah, sure. I got a late start, didn't go to college till I was 25, and then was in a hurry. I was on my way to law school and found the legislature instead and became a clerk and then a consultant and then an analyst. And then I ran campaigns. Then I became a lobbyist. I lobbied for the Medical Association and then started my own firm. And I loved the world of public policy, and it was interesting, never a dull moment. But the politics is a little caustic, and it challenged me down to my core, and I ended up sick. I had papillary carcinoma in 2011, which is thyroid cancer. I had underwent a radical thyroidectomy and lymph node dissection and a round of radiation. And I went back, I wanted to get back to normal. But what I didn't realize at the time was that normal is what made me sick. The lifestyle and the stress and the toxic environment. And so 6 months later, it came back. I had to have a second round of radiation. There were complications. It's never just about the cancer. My marriage failed, and the business, I looked at it and I decided I don't want to do it anymore. So I reevaluated. I made lifestyle changes. A friend of mine had gotten out of politics and opened a yoga studio. She took me through therapeutic yoga for cancer and taught me how to meditate. And the ravishes of radiation, I'm atrophied, I was weak, and both mentally and physically. And she took me through Pilates, and I regained my strength and started martial arts. And then did a kind of an assessment of where I wanted to be. And as I was doing this assessment, teachers began to appear like Wayne Dyer. I read The Power of Intention, and Carolyn Meese, Why We Don't Heal, Anatomy of the Spirit. And I began to reevaluate my whole perspective. And the power of the mind was of great interest. And the universe just kind of led me in the right direction. I ended up in LA, south from Sacramento, where I had been living. And there's a nationally accredited school for hypnotherapy there. And I just happened to know somebody who knew somebody who went there. And we had dinner and we talked about it. And I had never been hypnotized before. But I was so intrigued with the power of the subconscious mind, the book of the same name, Joseph Murphy, and I dove right in. And I saw it as an avenue to begin to help others, which was the premise of The Power of Intention by Wayne Dyer, is to put yourself into the service of others. And so I really, I asked the universe for a process by which I could be in the service of others. In fact, I even wrote a letter to Archangel Michael and said, I've got these skills that people paid me a lot of money for, but how do I help others with them instead of, corporations and politicians? Signed my name, took it in the backyard, lit it on fire, and gave it to the universe. And within weeks, I was directed. So that became my platform to help others. I dove in to school and the subject matter and did a residency afterwards, and began seeing clients, and it was uh, a portion of my spiritual awakening, which is, it's taken 7 years. It's been a process, but it has really led me to what I believe is my soul's purpose.
And working with clients, I'm curious, what maybe some of the things that you've learned just about, kind of the body and the mind as far as how, physical diseases can sort of manifest with, or have some psychological element in it. Just talk to me about that. What kind of the biggest, learning experiences that you've gotten just, doing this work?
Oh yeah, it's been fascinating. So, uh, a couple of points. First, childhood is so important. I do with every client, I do a deep dive and a history, and we go over their childhood and their family structure, because much of what manifests later in life is directly or indirectly resulting from childhood experiences. And so, one of the very valuable uh, things that I learned at HMI was counseling and interviewing. I'd always been a good listener, but as a lobbyist, I listened to respond instead of listened to reflect and incorporate. So, and also when you're doing hypnotherapy, it's super important that you use the client's words and not yours, because we're suggestible to ourselves. And so if I gave my words and spoken the way I speak, it wouldn't be as effective. So it's super important that you listen and you use their reflective words, reflective listening, and the words that they use. And I do a lot of inner child work. So that's the first thing I wanted to share. Childhood is so important, and children, blame themselves for so much, and then they carry these things forward. And and so I'm keenly aware of that component, and oftentimes the origins are seen in experiences from childhood. And trauma is cumulative, and trauma can be, you don't have to see somebody die or something. Trauma can be a bitter disappointment or a slight, or, there's all sorts of things that can create a traumatic imprint. So childhood is the first thing. Second thing, and it's related, usually people come in for something it's not what it's related. It's not what it's about. They come in for sugar, or they come in for weight, or they come in for these things that they present with, but it's almost always has an emotional underpinning. And again, I'm going back to childhood, and a review of their life experience and their family structure is going to help us discover that. Then the other thing is, you know, there's a whole body of medicine called psychosomatic medicine. Now, it got a kind of a bad name at some point along the way. It's all in your head, but it really is the mind-body connection. And there's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's all about how we somatize our emotional issues into our body. And I'll give you a prime example of that with a client experience. She came in, she had fibromyalgia, and she'd had it for 9 years, and she had seen doctors, had access to great doctors, and she, professional, worked in the legislature, and they took an account of her symptoms and told her what they thought she had, and said, the only thing we can do is control the pain. Here are some pills. And so she took pills for 8 years that had all these terrible side effects, and she was depressed, have a hard time getting out of bed, and just not a very good quality of life. And so she, on her own, stopped taking the pills, both opioids and psychotropic drugs. And um, then she came to see me, and I did the family structure, and she'd had a tough childhood on the other side of the tracks with a single mom, but she managed that. She had gone into the Air Force, and she was successfully navigated a tour in the Air Force, and excelled at that. And got into a great career. And so she was very strong. She was a very strong woman. So we did Inner Child. We did the Garden of Life, where I take her into the garden of her life, and we rake up all the dead old leaves of people and events that no longer serve her, and kind of light it on fire and burn it out and plant new seeds, which is just a metaphor for writing a new story. And then in a subsequent session, I asked her if she was ready to get rid of this. And she said, well, if I could get rid of this, I'd have done it a long time ago. I said, okay, but if you could. And so I took her through a session where I took detailed notes about what she would do if it was gone, who she would be with, what she would be doing, all the things that she would do, what her life would look like. And then when I took her into hypnosis, I had her I said to her that when she was ready to let go of it, her arm would begin to lift and rise. And it took a little while, but sure enough, her arm began to lift and rise, and it was up here in front of her. And I read back to her all the things that she had said that she would do. And then I brought her up out of the hypnosis, and her arm was still up. And the first thing she saw was her arm sticking up. So her subconscious and her conscious mind connected on an agreement that she was ready to let it go. And it turns out that she was a very physically strong person. I was the first one that asked her, what was going on in your life when it started? And it turns out she'd gone through a nasty divorce. There was a child involved, and she was very emotional, and she couldn't handle the emotional pain. So she shoved it into her strong body. She somatized that emotional pain into her body, and it manifested as a collection of autoimmune symptoms. And she masked it and band-aided it with opioids and antidepressants for 8 years until she was ready. And so I usually do every week. I let 2 weeks go between the next session. And then I emailed her and said, are you ready for your next session? She said, yes. So I emailed back, kind of holding my breath, what would you like to work on? And she came back with motivation. I've been sleeping in, I've been depressed for so long, I don't know how to act. And so I was so happy that it had nothing to do with the pain. The pain was gone. And now she just wanted to work on motivation. So the mind-body connection is critical. There's psychosomatic medicine. There's also psychoneuroimmunology. UCLA has a big department on that, and that's mind, body, spirit. So there are Western allopathic approaches to these type of things, but it doesn't get the attention that pharmaceuticals and more invasive interventions and therapies tend to get. So there's a huge psychological component. I mean, another great book, Deepak Chopra, Quantum Healing, right? And in it, he, as have others, they speak widely on the placebo effect, right? So any drug that goes to market in a blind study, there's a third of the group gets nothing, a third of the group gets the marketed drug, and a third of the group gets a sugar pill. And 30% of the time, the people with the sugar pill are healed. And so the role of the mind and expectancy is super important in health. On the flip side of that is the nocebo effect. There was a study done that I don't know, 75% of medical students, they get sick with the symptoms that they're studying when they're in medical school. So we can make ourselves sick too. I mean, we can look around today. There's a lot of folks struggling with the stress over the current health scare and the condition going around, and there are a lot of effects of that if we don't do self-care for our state of mind and keeping ourselves with a healthy perspective. So those are the 2 or 3 things in response to your question about the mind-body connection. The mind and the body are closely connected. There are some who argue that our organs have intelligence, that the brain and the heart speak to each other, and as well as the other organs. The gut is known as the second brain. And in quantum healing, Dr. Chopra talks about the intelligence of our neurochemistry. And so we can analyze the components of the neurochemistry, and we can synthesize it in the laboratory. But the drug that results from that laboratory synthesis, that lacks the intelligence of the human body. And that's why there's inefficacy and side effects. So the body is a powerful machine, and the mind is intricately connected with its performance and its health.
Well said. And you mentioned the nocebo effect. I was actually going to ask you a question kind of around surrounding that. I was actually just listening to an audiobook called Mind to Matter by Dawson Church, and he was sort of bringing up, some case studies about sort of patients who had sort of, when he got to the underlying root of their problem, it often tended to be, there was some element of them holding on to sort of the illness because they were getting some positive, or not necessarily even positive, but some attention from it. And I'm curious just to ask you, how do you see that playing out much in your work? Is that a rare thing? Is it a common thing?
Absolutely common. We refer to it as secondary gain. In Carolyn Meese's YouTube video, Why We Don't Heal, it becomes our story. And so that Garden of Life uh, approach that I spoke about, it's about writing a new story. There's another saying: before you help someone heal, make sure they're ready to let go of the thing that made them sick. So our stories, I'm sure we all know someone who posts on Facebook on a regular basis about their illness. And some are, I mean, and again, psychosomatic medicine is complex. Doesn't mean they aren't in pain. It doesn't mean their symptoms aren't real. It just means they're holding on to them because it's part of their story. And I do a lot of work around that. Are you ready to heal? Are you ready to let go? Are you ready to write a new story? We're powerful humans. The challenge lies in the uh, empowerment versus responsibility conundrum, right? So take, for example, Viktor Frankl's quote: between stimulus and response is a space, and in that space lies our power. And our power is there because we get to decide what kind of human being we want to be. So on one hand, it's very empowering. We get to decide. On the other hand, it can be a little scary for some, because now they have the responsibility. They can no longer externalize their fate, right? Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you'll call it fate. And it's so easy to point to something outside of ourselves as the reason why we can't get better. Or, Carolyn Meese tells the story of this Navajo Indian fellow who had been in World War II, and he was captured by the Germans, and he came back, and the experience, he was crippled up, it's just unexplained paralysis. And so the tribe gathered around, and they were doing an intervention to help him. And he had told these stories about having bugs shoved down his throat, and torture and all these type of things. And the tribe, someone had found a guard from the prison camp, and he told the story that the worms and stuff he shoved in his mouth was so that he would survive. He was going to starve to death. And so when he got the different perspective, when it was no longer seen as torture, when it was seen instead as benevolence, then he began to heal. And I'm paraphrasing terribly, but it's in the Carolyn Meese video on YouTube on Why We Don't Heal. And I just thought it was a fascinating example. There's another example trying to remember what book it was. It escapes me right now, but the story was about this fellow who had a terrible cancer prognosis, and he wasn't given but a few months to live, and there was this newly announced experimental drug, and it was supposed to be a wonder drug, anti-cancer wonder drug, and he wasn't a candidate because his prognosis was so terrible. But he begged his doctor to um, to administer the drug for him, and the doctor felt bad, and so he did. And this guy had a miraculous recovery, and it was unexplained. Allopathic medicine calls it spontaneous remission. They don't really know how to explain things that happen outside of um, uh, you know their paradigm. And so this guy had a miraculous recovery, and uh, and then it was announced that the clinical trials were not successful, and that the drug doesn't work, and it wasn't going to go to market. And the man quickly declined and died. And so the term is expectancy. If we expect to have a death sentence, we're likely to march right into that sentence. So it's really important how our self-talk is very, very critical. Self-talk is so important. How we talk to ourselves. We all have this onboard dialogue, this inner voice that we have conversations with, and and we can lift ourselves up, or we can knock ourselves down. It really is that simple. So when the coaching part of what I do is I teach people to meditate, and I teach people about their self-talk, because if you create the expectation, you are very likely to live up to it.
Right. Norman, I wanted to switch gears a little bit. Well, maybe kind of along the same lines. I wanted to ask you about your book that I had mentioned in the intro, the book that you're coming out with, Mastermind, Master Life. I was wondering if you could just kind of tell me what sort of inspired you to write that, and a little about what the book is about.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to write this book when I first started the journey learning about hypnosis, but the first book was Take Charge of Your Cancer, the 7 Proven Steps to Healing and Recovery. And it really was a cathartic memoir about my cancer journey and what I learned, and 7 empowering steps, because it's hard to know what to do, and it's not very empowering to go where you're told and take what you're supposed to take. And so, I learned these things the hard way, and there's 7 steps that people can take. So when I got that one out of the way, I went to work on the book that I really wanted to write about, because there's such a misconception about hypnosis and hypnotherapy. All right. People's introduction is usually television, Hollywood, vaudeville. Movies of vaudeville, because it's not really going on anymore. But, the state fair, stage hypnosis, or Vegas, these are people's introduction, the pocket watch, you're getting very sleepy. And it's such a powerful modality, uh, the non-invasive, organic, and natural, that I just want to go tell it to the mountain. So this book is about, what is it? What is hypnosis? What's the history of it? How long has it been around? Who's been involved in it? What are the highs and lows? And then what does science say? And this isn't a scholarly journal, but it is a review of what studies that are going on. There's some major work out of England, the UK. The Human Givens Project is amazing. Stanford University, Dr. David Spiegel. And we have modern machines that can measure all this stuff now, and they can rattle off precise explanations of what's going on in your brain, for those who need it. And so I gave just enough science for those who need that foundation to be able to trust. And so what is it? What's its history? What does science say? And how can you use it? That's basically it in a nutshell: the powerful subconscious mind, and how you can use trance work to better yourself, and overcome problems, or place yourself into motivation or excellence and performance. So this is the work that I do, what I've learned in the 6 years I've been doing it, and uh, why people should understand it in the context different from Vegas showmanship.
Right. Do you still encounter that so that when you talk to a lot of new clients, are they still they're still under the impression that hypnosis is sort of that, what you were talking about?
Yeah, in my pre-induction talk, I dispel a lot of myths. It's not a loss of control. You know, you're free to get up at any moment. It's deep relaxation with focused concentration. The American Psychology Association calls it as a state of inner absorption, concentration, and focused attention. And so I dispel a lot of myths. One of the common things is, oh, I don't think I can be hypnotized. Well, Dr. Spiegel et al., they in their studies they say that 75 to 80% can be hypnotized, and there's 20 to 25% who can't be. I say, in my experience, if you want to be, you can be. All right. It's so in my therapeutic relationship, trust and rapport. And if we have trust and rapport and we build a partnership, and they realize that I'm not going to do anything to them, we're going to do something together, then everyone can be hypnotized. It's just deep relaxation. In fact, hypnosis is a natural state that we go into every day. If you're driving home from work and you end up in the driveway and you don't remember the trip, you were in hypnosis. Radio advertisers know that. That's why drive time's so expensive. So, um, it really is fairly ubiquitous, but at the same time, it's non-invasive. Doesn't take any chemicals, no pills, no medicine. It's just a desire to do it. And so, and to let go of the things that you've been holding on to, and to embrace writing a new story. And so that's a lot of the work I do is around writing the new story.
And speaking of sort of writing the new story and I wanted to ask you about, hypnosis for peak performance, and if you work with those sort of clients, and just kind of what you think about, helping people, maybe not necessarily with a diagnosable, psychiatric or medical condition, but just helping people sort of gain more of an awareness and more of a control over the way their minds function. Um,
Well, I mean, mindset is everything. Uh, any top performer knows that it begins with the mindset, and training and mindset are critical. The same part of the mind that keeps your temperature at 98.6 uh, controls our behavior. That's why oftentimes on the negative side, there's some kind of threat, and you have a defense mechanism, and this behavior develops. The threat goes away and the behavior persists. And so a lot of times what I do is help people let go of that behavior that's no longer necessary. But by the same token, athletes and performers get in the state of flow. It's a hypnotic state, that this flow state that your subconscious mind, you practice and practice and practice, and it becomes, oftentimes if you talk to top performers, that it's effortless. They're in the state of flow. And I mean, just look at watch Michael Jordan play basketball, or Magic Johnson, or we can think of, or Tiger Woods playing golf. Many of them used hypnosis. Tiger Woods used hypnosis. Jack Nicklaus used hypnosis. Many Muhammad Ali, Jack Foreman. I mean,
Mike
George
Tyson, I
Foreman.
know.
Yeah, I mean, they've used hypnosis because it helps you overcome the blocks. So what do we do if we have a perceived threat? Our mind tries to wall it off or obviate it in some fashion. And if we lessen the threat, and now we have our full attention on our performance instead of guarding against the threat. So I have done some on a limited basis. It's for some reason I just tend to attract folks who are trying to let go of negative behavior. But I have had I had a young boxer in LA who I helped, and you know, and that's fun because it's unlocking potential, which is it's a lot of fun. It's as much, you know, it's as much fun helping people unlock potential as it is releasing them from something that they've been holding on to. But for some reason, you know, we attract a certain set, and that seems to be my I don't know if it's because my expertise or, you know, what I'm attracted to, but there's definitely many examples of people, high performers, using hypnosis to up their game, next level, overcome a block, right? So we have this block because, and again, what does it do? It speaks back to our self-talk. We, you know, this self-limiting dialogue that's going on. Maybe you had a trial and you didn't, you know, something wasn't right, and now that's stuck in your mind, and you can't get past that experience. Is it, you know, Dr. Joe Dispenza will tell you change is difficult. We have 60 to 70,000 thoughts every day, and 90% of them are the same as they were yesterday. And that's why I try and help people learn to meditate and start their day with, you know, 10 minutes. For 10 minutes, just be quiet and still. And before that onslaught of 60 to 70,000 thoughts come pouring back, you know, take a moment and decide where you want to go and what you want to do. And you can begin, because what happens for most of us, it takes some threat or some crisis or some breakup, or, you know, or you get fired, or there's some, otherwise we just put one foot in front of the other, or, you know, maybe we show up and bring half our game because we're afraid of showing how powerful we are. And so breaking that cycle of repetitive thought and automatic action is very, very, very important if you want to change in any fashion.
And you mentioned sort of blockages. What in your practice, what are kind of the most common ones that you run into with people? Is it childhood experiences? Um, is it all sort of rooted in childhood, as you were sort of alluding to maybe at the beginning?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, look, we have everything. We're born with everything we need to be whatever we want. And along the way, we're told, no, can't do that. That'll never work. No, no. I think about the things you're told in childhood. Money doesn't grow on trees. Why can't you be like your sister? You know what I mean? So these things become our programming, and they're played subconsciously. We're not even aware of them. And so, uh, you know, we create our own glass ceiling. I had a client who was super successful, and he had multiple locations for his business, and he was highly intelligent, but he felt blocked. And so we did 3 sessions, and we worked around his childhood, and uh, it turns out he was hyperactive and very intelligent, and his dad didn't know how to handle him, and he locked him in his room for long periods of time. And that little boy was stuck in the room, and that was a limitation. And when, you know, he didn't realize he had the key to the door the whole time, but going back in a regression and allowing them to visit and introduce them, the adult him and the child him, and letting him know he was loved, and, you know, had everything he needed, he was able to transcend those blocks that kept him before. I mean, one of my favorite sayings is about the little boy who goes down the hallway to his room. He opens the door and it's full of horse poop. And he says, there's a pony in here somewhere. And it's that eternal optimism. It's that way, that reframe. Basically, that's your most basic of reframes. Instead of seeing a pile of manure, he's encouraged that there's a pony in there. So it's super important that we reframe things. The reframe is so critical to everything I do, because you go down this path and this expectancy, this expectation, based on the limiting things we've been told. I mean, you're told as a kid, grow up, and so and no, you can't do that. Don't, who are you to think you could do something like that? And this is just the ongoing dialogue that's in the back of our mind over and over and over. So these are the blocks, and it takes, you know, it takes some reflective listening, and I just ask questions and get them to, free associate about their childhood. I mean, um, I had a client who was, she was retired nurse, and she couldn't lose the last 10 pounds, and no matter what she did. And it turned out that she was still trying to vie for the love of her deceased father, who was the life of the party. Always, he had come from lack as a child and the depression, and was in the war, and he came out and was very successful and had all his money, and there was food and drink everywhere, always, in the life of the party. And she was still trying to win his affection, and he passed away. But being the life of the party, and the eating in ways that so it was emotional. Oftentimes eating is emotional, and it comes down to finding. But her block was, it was her connection to her father. Just like I had another client who came to me for sugar, and we did 3 sessions, and I did some negative reinforcement on her sugar, and it was important to her because she runs an organic products company, and so it was fairly successful. She did the 3 sessions, and she went about her business. And about 6 months later, she called in a panic and said, "I've fallen off the wagon. Can you help me? I just think I'm binging on sugar." I said, "Sure, come on in." And so I pulled her file before she came in, and I was reviewing it. And so when she got there, I said, "You said you thought you had dealt with your mom's death the first time we talked. So let me ask you, did your mom bake for you? Did she make cookies and cupcakes and stuff?" I said, "This isn't about the sugar. This is the connection to your mom. What's going on?" She said, "The anniversary of my mom's passing is coming up, and I put on the wake every year." And so in the run up to her mother's wake and remembrance celebration, she needed to cling to that sugar, which was her connection to her mom. So we did a session on coping with loss, and helped her release her mom lovingly, and the sugar was no longer an issue.
I'm curious, how often do you think that have you experienced that people are able, because what you did there sounds, very intuitive, where you were able to kind of put 2 and 2 together, as far as like getting to the root of the issue. How many people do you experience that are able to kind of figure that out? Like they know, oh, I'm experiencing whatever it is. I'm feeling really lazy. I haven't been going to the gym, but then they're actually able to kind of like figure out where that sort of issue got rooted.
Most people paper over it and soldier on. The people I see can't figure it out. And when then they feel embarrassed when I'm fairly quick to come to it. I mean, you know what I mean? As I'm taking my notes and I'm asking questions, and I'm circling around the family structure and whatnot, I'm fairly quick, and they get all embarrassed. I'm like, "Listen, you're human. This is so common, right? And there's nothing to be embarrassed about. You're too close to it. Of course, of course it's difficult for you to see that, to connect those dots. But my skill and my gift is a combination of having done this for 10,000 hours plus now, and and there's a bit of intuition. I have some gifts, and that's why, circling back to the your question about why hypnosis, this is my avenue. This is my avenue to be able to find my soul purpose. And the same kind of analysis and intuition that made me a good lobbyist makes me a good hypnotherapist.
Awesome. We're getting sort of close to the end of the show, but for our listeners, And I asked Erica this question when we did the episode. I'm curious what your take on this is, as far as, if people, really enjoyed listening to the episode and are curious about finding out more about hypnosis or actually going to a hypnotist themselves. What sort of recommendations, as far as like finding, a good practitioner, a good program, a good fit? What would you sort of advise?
First and foremost, training. There are schools you can get a certificate in a weekend or a week or 2 weeks. It's really important that the person who you're considering has solid training, uh, because in order to be effective, this isn't biting into an onion and thinking it's an apple. All right, this is, there may be, some regression, like the childhood. This is some stuff that can dig some stuff up, and it's really important that the person understands what they're doing. All right, and so training is important. The other thing is rapport. If you don't have rapport, you won't let them in. You won't. There's got to be that partnership. You have to kind of like the person, and so that's super important. So training and rapport and trust and rapport are the two absolute, must-haves. You got to trust the person, and you got to kind of like them. And then if they're well trained and didn't just get a certificate on a weekend course, then you've got a good shot at being super successful at what it is you're trying to do.
Awesome. Well, Norman, I've had an awesome time having you on the show today. If people want to learn more about your work, read your books, where would you direct them?
NormanPlotkin.com, NormanPlotkin is my website. I got a ton of information there, links to my books. Both books are on Amazon and elsewhere, both in ebook and paperback. And there's some videos and stuff. And so, my website's a really good resource for what I'm about, and the things that I'm trying to share. Um, and then my Facebook page is Norman Plotkin Inc. That's INC, Facebook. And on that page, I've got links to my Saturday evening virtual meditation, group meditations that I lead. And so anybody's welcome to join that by Zoom. And so I'm also on LinkedIn, my name as well.
Very cool. And for our listeners who enjoyed the show today, go ahead and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're Roscoe's Wetsuit. And you can also find audio versions of the podcast available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. Go ahead and also follow us on Instagram. We're Roscoe's Wetsuit Podcast. All right, Norman, again, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Toby, it's been my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely.